All right. Good morning, Doug. Today we got some Q&A from our viewers. Once again, a reminder to viewers, if you want to ask questions of Doug, the best way of doing it is joining our Telegram channel. There's a link for that in the description of all of our videos. Join the Telegram channel, and then I periodically solicit questions from viewers. You submit them there. We get through as many of them as we can. So before I get into questions today, though, Doug, I think we should address the John McAfee situation because I know he was a friend of yours. I know you... and he, just for people who might not know, he was kind of an outlaw in many ways, but he was the originator of virus antivirus software with McAfee Antivirus. He sold that company, and he lived. He was a larger than life figure. He lived, as an outlaw for a period of time, and ultimately he was arrested on tax evasion charges and spent many months in a Spanish jail. They approved extradition of him to the U.S. a couple of days ago, and shortly thereafter, they found him, from what I've been able to discover, hanged in his cell. So anyway, Doug, what are your thoughts on John McAfee? Maybe share some experiences with him and what your thoughts are.
Okay, so yeah, he was a kindred spirit in many ways. And well, the last conversation I had with him was a couple of years ago, maybe 2, 3, I don't know, I can't remember, because he spent a lot of time in Guatemala before they extradited him to the US, but then he escaped again and wound up in that Spanish jail. So the timeline is unclear to me. I can't remember it. I don't keep records of these things. But we were going to go off to the Solomon Islands, where I had a connection with the president of the country, and would have been Mr. Toad's wild ride, McAfee and I in the Solomons. But before that, we spent a day together at his house in Tennessee, and it was interesting because not only did John at all times carry a 45 on his waist, he was a fan of the 1911 model, which I am too, but he had 3 ex-Army armed guards living on the premises with him.
Yes,
I thought that was a bit of overkill, quite frankly.
Former special forces guys, if I recall, and I think that he was. I don't know how legitimate it was, but he sincerely believed that people were trying to kill him, and he was just trying to defend himself.
Well, it may be true. I mean, how much is paranoia and how much is reality? But he lived way out in the country, frankly, because it took us an hour and a half when he drove me back to the airport in Nashville. But anyway, he's a barrel of monkeys. He was a lot of fun. I thought he was a good guy. I mean, he got involved in some very sketchy crypto Bitcoin deals, or not Bitcoin, but just crypto blockchain deals.
During the ICO craze.
Yeah, right. So I consider that kind of questionable activity on his part, but I guess he's dead now. Sorry to see it. We're the same age. We're both 75, although he was a few months older than I am. So rest in peace.
Do you think there's of course, there's lots of we live in the time of conspiracy theory because nothing can be trusted. Information we receive anyway can't be trusted. There are a lot of people online saying, "Oh, there's just no way that he would have killed himself." In fact, he said in a tweet, "There's zero. If you see me dead, by suicide, I've been, effectively Epsteined. That he wouldn't really kill himself." I mean, do you have any thoughts on that at all?
Well, that's a psychological assessment on my part. And as far as I'm concerned, he was totally non-suicidal. He was a wild man. I mean, he really was a wild and crazy guy. And I just didn't see, listen, there's nothing wrong with suicide because, if your body is falling apart and, it's just time to shed this mortal coil, well, I mean, it's perfectly honorable to do it yourself. So nothing wrong with suicide morally, and that's what he believed too. But no, he didn't kill himself. He had no reason to.
Well, he was just about to be extradited to the U.S. and spending his life in a U.S. Federal
Well,
prison.
yeah, maybe or maybe not, or maybe he could have beaten the rap. If listen, the crazy thing about this is that if the main cause for his extradition was tax charges, this is really bad news, because there are three offenses that have historically been non-extraditable among civilized nations. One is fiscal offenses, tax. Uh, Second is religious, and the third is political. You can't be extradited according to treaties. But of course, if the US government wants you, what they do is they just put the arm on any foreign government, and it doesn't matter what the treaty is. They'll create a loophole or just whatever. So it's the rule of law is a dead duck internationally when you're dealing with the US at this point.
Well, I think domestically that's been demonstrated as well.
Yeah, it is. But no, my opinion is it was not in his psychological makeup to have done that. And he was in excellent health. He pumped iron and all this type of thing. So no, so I think they killed him. Now the question is, why would they have done that? I mean, it's so bold to have done that. But you can't get the facts. We'll probably never get the facts at all.
We know nothing about Epstein.
No, we don't. And if we get anything that is alleged to be a fact, it's could well be made up. So this is the world we live in.
It is. Okay. All right. So let's get on to the questions. Someone says, I've been arguing with a good friend of mine about the peak economy in US history. And I believe it was the Gilded Age, the period from like 1870 to 1910. Yeah, I'm looking for a reference, a book, a review paper, or other source that kind of provides a quantitative analysis to back that up or to prove me wrong. He wonders if we could recommend something that might help him be proved correct or incorrect on that time period.
About that era, I mean, look, the best book on US history is Murray Rothbard's Opus Magnus called, and I forget what Rothbard calls his great history, Born in Freedom, or something. The heck is the name of his big book? Because, the thing with his history is it's not just a recantation of who won this battle and who was elected then and what happened there. There should be an interpretation of the meaning of these things. So which history book you read is critical. I mean, it's not just the facts, it's the facts behind the facts and the interpretation and meaning of those facts that are accepted. So Murray Rothbard, forget the name of the book, but if you go to Amazon, I'm sure you'll figure it out.
Yeah, I'm looking, I don't see it right away, but in any case, one thing that I'll say, I did read a book that it doesn't provide any sort of qualitative or quantitative analysis, but it's a very interesting qualitative snapshot of that particular era. And the book it's called Chasing the Last Laugh. And it's actually, it's about Mark Twain's basically comedy tour. It was it was a world speaking tour he did at the end of his life. It was in the 1890s because he was deeply in debt and didn't want to leave, these burdens on his family because of all of his terrible mismanagement of investments. I mean, he was the best known living author at the time in the Anglo world. And so he went on a round the world speaking tour. And he went across the United States. He goes over to Australia and New Zealand, and then he goes to the British-controlled India and to South Africa, and this is drawn from his letters and his notes and from other people who were all part of this trip, and it gives you this amazing snapshot of that time in history. And it is, I don't know quantitatively, how it would rank, but I think qualitatively, based upon the experience described in this book, the world is a very different and very, very interesting and very diverse place at that time. So, I mean, I've recommended this book to hundreds of people, It was probably the best book I read like 5 years ago, but it's excellent. It's called Chasing the Last Laugh by I think Richard Zacks is his name.
Okay, I'm going to go on Amazon and pick it up. That's great.
Okay.
But as far as the Gilded Age, I'm a huge fan of the Gilded Age. In terms of the rise of the average American standard of living, there's been nothing really comparable to it. It was, it was the freest, and we were. It was a great time before the inception of the Federal Reserve, before the income tax. So
Yeah.
yeah, fantastic time. And
Actually,
technology was blossoming. I mean, at a faster rate than it is today, actually. So
yeah, actually, I just thought of something. I'm going to pause this recording real quick, Doug, because I want to grab this book that might answer this question better. 1 second. Okay, I just remembered a book that I had that does cover this period and is definitely very quantitative. And it's this one. It's The Rise and Fall of American Growth. And basically, it goes through. I mean, it's profound. It was shocking, actually, in the details that it provides. It's probably the best economic history of America, and how essentially the period of from basically 1870 until about 1920, that change in the standard of living of Americans, and from electrification to the transportation systems. I mean, it just dramatically improved all over the country incredibly fast. And I think that book actually describes it extremely well. So in any case, let's see, I'll leave it at that. Next question. Find my notes here. Oh, I put them over somewhere else. 1 second. Okay, so the next question is, why Doug left Hong Kong in the past, taking into account that this was a city that was most close to libertarian ideals, and had and still is mentally the most anarcho-capitalist population.
yeah, well, I'm so glad that I lived in Hong Kong for all the time that I did. Look, when I bought my apartment in Hong Kong, uh, it was right on the waterfront above the Hong Kong Yacht Club. I paid an unbelievable $40,000 for it because it was during the China crisis. And I was on the 13th floor of that building, and my apartment was cheaper than one on the first floor. Why might that be? It was one of those times people were afraid that the Chinese were going to take over the city and they wouldn't repair the elevators. That was the reason that I was given. Well, I subsequently sold that apartment for, I think I got 1.2 million for something I paid 40 grand for. Talk about a real estate score, okay? And I don't know what it would be worth now, probably less, but before this latest brouhaha with the Chinese, it was probably worth 1.5 or 1.8. I mean, I heard things that people were guessing that that's the case, up from 40 grand, okay? Now, I got there just at the end of the Susie Wong era, where you could walk through Wan Chai, and there were all the cat houses, just like in that movie, The World of Susie Wong with William Holden. So Hong Kong was already rapidly changing. Now you go back to Hong Kong today, and I haven't been to Hong Kong for 3 or 4 years at this point, and it's nothing but high rises, and it's changed totally. Look, it used to be why? It used to be a really international, interesting city with people from all over the world, lots of expats. Now it's a Chinese city. The expats have all gone to Singapore. So it's just not as interesting as it was, as exotic as it was. It's just another big city, frankly. So that's really why I also, did I really want to live in Hong Kong? I mean, I've been there, done that. Let's go someplace else.
Yeah. And what year was it that you sold your apartment there?
Let's see. I got there in 85, and I sold the apartment when? 2010.
So you had a place there. You had one of your bolt holes basically there for a long, long time.
Yeah, but most of the time, I mean, I lived there in that apartment for 3, 4 years. But most of the time after that, I rented it out, and it rented for a lot of money. So it was a great investment uh, as well. I mean, the law firm that I used ran it, and it was trouble free. It was it was great. Normally, I don't like the idea of buying a house and renting it. It's just a pain in the ass dealing with the public. But worked out well for me in Hong Kong.
Good. Okay. Um, Doug, do you see a sudden population reduction event in the Western world to be deflationary or inflationary?
Okay, well, got to look at a historical reference, and perhaps perhaps the best one is the during the 14th century when the Black Plague overtook Europe, and it is said in between 30 and 60%, nobody knows, but those are the numbers tossed around, of the population died, within just a few years. Well, what happened then? Uh, Average wage level went way up. I mean, it destroyed much of the old superstructure, and people that still had capital and land needed people to work it, so they had to pay them because Europeans weren't slaves. They may have been serfs, but they weren't slaves. So if that happened, I suppose the value of labor of working men would go up the same way it did back then.
But you would assume that there would be far less demand, though, in general, like that, so that outside of labor, you probably get I guess, a combination of two. You have inflation and labor, and perhaps deflation. And actually, we shouldn't even; these aren't even the right words because inflation. This is all money supply. Is actually what inflation and deflation is. But the costs of labor will probably went up a lot. But you have to. But I wonder if the cost of goods also went up. I guess if there's less production, they'd have to. But maybe assets go down. I don't know.
It's going to be different because in those days, of course, almost everybody was in the business of growing food. Today, what, 2% of the population grows all the food. So what's going to happen on the farm to start with? And a giant field of wheat. I mean, is the supply line still going to get it to the safe way where you can buy a loaf of Wonder Bread? I mean, this is terra incognita.
Okay. So let's see. Next question. Considering the fact that most people need some form of religion to go through life, do you believe the revival of ancient religions, maybe Greek or Roman gods or Zoroastrianism, that helped in formation of super civilizations with heavy focus on virtue rather than fear, is something to be considered after the global collapse?
Mm. Well, it seems to me that Christianity is on its way out, quite frankly. Uh, I'm not going to say, is that good, is that bad? But if you look at Europe, uh, it's a post Christian continent at this point. And the trend is clearly in motion in the US and uh, as well. I mean, there may still be a lot of churches, but Christianity is just not what it used to be, even in this country. Uh, but as far as the ancient religions are concerned, there was a real distinction. See, today we look upon religion as being a place to go for moral guidance. Ask yourself, what would Jesus do for moral guidance? Well, I'm the wrong person to comment on that because I always say, what would Al Swearingen do? But the ancients did not look to their myths or their theology. I mean, one man's myth is another man's theology, if you would. But they looked to philosophy for moral guidance. That was totally different from religion. Religion was a matter of giving cult to the gods. That was what it was about. Philosophy, what was right and what was wrong, good and evil, that was for philosophers. So, in a way, Christianity has really corrupted uh, our philosophical view of the world, because there's only one source of what the Bible. Of course, there's so many interpretations of it that it's become academic. But there was something that he mentioned there in that question. There's a series on TV that I've seen occasionally called Lucifer, and it's kind of a fun series to watch because we have Lucifer, who's a devilish and charming blade who comes to Los Angeles for whatever reasons. And he asks, and it gets, actually the screenwriters go into a lot of theological aspects of it. And Lucifer asks people, one of his superpowers is he can ask people, what do you desire? And the human will have to tell him what they desire, and that helps him. He's a consultant to a good-looking LA cop. That's a standard kind of way they do these things. But he has a brother, the Archangel Michael. And it's interesting the way Michael is portrayed as a bad guy. I mean, Lucifer is the good guy, and Michael is it's a reverse. And Michael will ask people, what do you fear?
Fear, yeah.
Fear, because a lot of Christianity, I'm afraid, is all about fear. I know it's like George Carlin said in one of his famous riffs. He said, God loves you, but if you don't do what he says, you're going to burn in hell for eternity. A lot of Christianity is, believe it or not, based on fear. And Christianity itself, I mean, it's actually two religions in one. One is what Jesus is said to have said, because the Gospels, I mean, if Jesus died in 30 AD, the Gospels didn't even start to appear until the 60s. The last one, the Gospel of John, was about the year 100. So what somebody said decades before, Jesus may or may not have said what the four Gospels say he said. But that's totally different from what St. Paul said. Mm-hmm. And most of the New Testament is the epistles and the Acts of the Apostles, and which is all about St. Paul, Saul of Tarsus. Totally different guy, totally different worldview from Jesus, as far as I can determine anyway. So they managed to meld these two things together. And anyway, what was the actual question that I was supposed to answer with that preamble?
Basically, do you think there will be a renewal of some of these ancient religious beliefs, as people are trying to cling for something?
Yeah, no, I don't. I think that Yahweh is on his way out, and Jesus is on his way out, more or less. Just like Zeus and Apollo and Thor have had their day in the sun. So no, I don't think so. But it's like Karl Marx said. He said religion is the crutch of humanity. That's true. I mean, everybody's afraid to die, and they'd like to think that things can only get better after you die. Everybody'd like to think that, of course, but it just doesn't make sense, and that's to me anyway. And that's a different. But here one final comment: religion. That was really what the question was about. So what's the definition of religion? What is a religion? And the definition I like to use is a religion is about investigating the possibility of life after death. I mean, that's really what they focus on. And you have secular religions like Marxism and so forth. They don't do that because they're secular religions. But traditional religions, all of them.
Is it just life after death, or is it is there something about the living moment, like things that are beyond understanding? It's like before a lot of ancient religions, before we had the tools of science, the tools of enlightenment, we would just explain things, say, well, that's the gods. We would just because the unexplainable essentially would be explained through religion. And so,
Yeah, yeah, that's right. And presumably, as science gets sharper, we can rely less on things that we make up in our own minds. But once again, speaking as a solipsist, where all of reality is basically a creation of minds, uh, who knows? I
right.
mean, maybe we're living in the Matrix.
In my mind, there could be Jesus because I've created it in my own mind, right? I mean, if you're really if you really ascribe to that philosophy.
Yeah, exactly. Nobody knows what Jesus was like. Actually, all we have is hearsay. People that wrote the Gospels did not know the man personally.
Right.
So who knows?
Who knows? Okay, let's see. Says, for now, I'm researching off-grid living and I'm taking action. Oh, sorry, he's just complimenting us. Just thanks for helping to motivate him. What does Doug think about the growing influence of Islam in Europe? This is a related question, I guess, to the last one.
Yeah, yeah, it is. Well, the thing with Islam, I think if you're going to have a religion, it helps to keep it simple. And Islam is a very simple religion. I mean, you can become a Mohammedan. There are 5 pillars of Islam. Let me see if I can remember them. You have to say the Shahada, which is there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. That's one thing you have to do. You have to give tithes to the what they call the Ummah, which is the Muslim community. Uh, if I was Muslim, I wouldn't be a very good one because I can only remember 2 of the 5 pillars that that. But look, it's a simple religion. It's you know it's a I know one of them is you have to pray. How many times? Is it 5 times a day?
I think it's 5 is what you're supposed to do. Yeah.
I think it is. Yeah. So we've got 3 of the pillars, but it's simple. And it's a communal religion where ideally you get together and pray, and people like that. It keeps it simple.
Well, and culturally, it seems to be that there's a big, population growth is a big part of the culture, if not the religion, and so just by the numbers of Muslims, that the religion is naturally spreading. I mean, it's like whereas Christian
Yeah,
civilization is dying off.
it is. It's group thinking, and it's a warlike religion because Muhammad himself was a warrior. I mean, he was always engaged in wars and banditry and things like that. So it's not a theoretically peaceful and gentle religion like Christianity is supposed to be. Yeah, I guess it's going to go. I guess it's going to keep growing. It's kind of a pity because it's like all these religions. They're essentially anti-rational, and Islam more than most.
Right, and it does have some of the same characteristics that we see in wokeism, where there's there's an effort to destroy previous history. I remember all these incredible ancient landmarks that the Taliban was destroying, for instance, in Afghanistan. They don't want there to be a history beyond that doesn't directly connect to Muhammad and all that, right?
Well, that's just one of the kind of offshoots of the religion because their rationale was that there is nothing worth knowing that's not in the Quran. So if that's the case, having these things that people pay attention to just distract you from what's important in life. But the Christians have done exactly the same thing throughout their history, less now than in the past. But in the early days, I mean, look, I mean, even when Cortez conquered the Aztecs, the priests that he took along with them went out of their way to destroy anything that looked like it had to do with the Aztec religion. And this was right back at the founding of Christianity. These these people these fanatics that subsequently became saints, wanted to destroy ancient documents and wisdom because it's not important if it's not in the Bible. So all these Abrahamic religions, I mean, the Jews are the same with their fanatic Hasidic sects and so forth. I mean, Abrahamic religions, the Middle East's gift to the world, and it's like a poisoned apple in many respects.
Okay, so we probably lost everybody who believes in God from this video so far. Let's say,
Well, I'm sorry. Listen,
all right.
I don't like to say things that upset people's basic worldviews because then they don't have anything to replace it, and they're unhappy in their own lives, and they're unhappy with you for having, you know. So I'm not trying to, create chaos.
No, I know. And you said we've specifically discussed this in at least 2 episodes before, the idea that you can understand the human desire to believe in something, and that there's a void there, and it's going to be filled with something, and that something could be a net negative or a net positive. And there are certain forms of Christianity, for example, there's certain forms of Judaism, and this, from what I understand, there's certain forms of Islam that are not damaging, they're not net negatives, I guess.
No, no, I would just say choose wisely.
Choose wisely. I agree with that. Okay, so let's see. How do Doug and Matt deal with information overload? There are so many sources of information and so many topics and current events, especially now, it seems like, to keep track of. What tactics do you use to curate and calibrate your information consumption?
I don't. I'm badly disciplined, but getting better disciplined, as you'll notice with
Yes.
the empty library, mostly empty in back of me. Good question. I don't have an answer. It's all about self-discipline, of course.
But you do sign up on specific people's emails lists who you respect their way of thinking,
Yeah.
whether you agree with it or not. And so then every day, basically delivered to your email box, are lots of things you could read, and what you choose to read or not. I guess it depends upon the day, but you kind of have it pulled to you.
That's right. And once you've figured out who thinks rationally and who thinks irrationally, what you want to try to do is stand on the shoulders of giants. They'll save you a lot of trouble. You don't have to reinvent the wheel every day.
Right. I agree with that. I think we discussed something like this before, and my approach with it, since I asked, is just simply that, I like lots of information. Like, I feel comfortable swimming in lots of new information coming my way. Actually, I find it stimulating, but also you do have to have a filtering mechanism, obviously, or else it's just too much. And I think that for me, what I'm constantly trying to do is I'm trying to identify trends about like what's actually happening in the world, and then form a hypothesis about those trends. So I'm looking for data points that sort of just add up to something that they can make me build a hypothesis around. And then my only effort after that is trying to disprove that hypothesis. So I will sort of focus in on articles or information that is actually contrary to the hypothesis about the trend. So, and then I can, as soon as when COVID first came out, I was like, this is a lot of interesting data points about like the way the governments are responding to it, because it's coming through Italy, and I could see that trend is coming here. I didn't know, what it meant exactly. But then, we've had multiple facets of this whole COVID thing over the years. And as soon as sort of the hypothesis feels confirmed, like, I have no interest in the information about it, it doesn't, so it gets completely filtered out of my equation, because it doesn't matter anymore. That's not even where the battle is, being fought. It's trying to understand how the future is going to roll out is what is interesting to me. So that's where I try and focus.
I totally agree with your approach. And you've got to figure out what's important and what just clutters your mind up with irrelevancies. And certainly in this COVID hysteria, that is very important. Yeah.
And anything that's sort of confirmation bias, you got to pass that stuff over. Like you already think it. You don't need more information to make sure it's kind of reinforce that idea in your head. It's a mistake.
That's right. You just try to monitor yourself so that you stay intellectually honest. And you may, I mean, we're all in our little information silos, but first you have to recognize, yeah, I probably am in a silo, and try to look out over the top and see what else is there. It's tough.
It's tough. Okay, Doug, what are your thoughts on Buddhism?
I'm a fan. I have several statues of the seated Buddha here in the house, prominently displayed. I like them as artwork, but I like them for the impression that they give. And I like most things about Buddhism generally, although, truth be told, the closest thing I have to a religious system that I'm really partial to, it's Taoism, the sayings of Lao Tse, which are very, very similar to Buddha. And frankly, Confucius, I read his Analects, and he was very wise, and don't disagree with anything that Confucius says either. So there's not much good that's come out of any place in the world except for the West. I'm a total Western civilization fan, with the exception of these religious philosophies that have come out of the East. I mean, all three of them, I think, are great.
What was when roughly was Lao Tzu's his book written? Do you know what time period that was?
Well, Lao Tzu was about 500 BC. So he was more or less, not exactly, but more or less contemporaneous with Buddha. And when was Confucius? I'm trying to think. Actually, I looked that up because I want to say Confucius was also kind of contemporary with those two. Am I right?
I'm checking right now.
One of the values of Wikipedia.
Yes, if I can spell it right here. Yes, about same period.
Now, this is interesting. You've got these three really superb, great philosophers. Let's say they're the 5th century BC, 4th century BC, that area. Oddly, that's about the same time frame as we had Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle.
Yes.
In the West. And there were a lot of pre-Socratics in addition, somewhat earlier. Socrates was about he was about the year, say 450 or something like that BC. So it's odd, all over East and West, same thing is happening. I mean, did aliens land with a giant black obelisk someplace? I don't know. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the Tao is amazing. Reading that is, I encourage everyone to read it. It's very simple. It's like, I think it's like 67 different short entries, almost poems in a way, but they're deeply profound. You could read it in one quick sitting, but if you're reading it right, you read one and then you must stop, and it's got to simmer and you have to think about it because it's really profound. Yeah, I agree. Okay. So next one is a guy who says he's a 66-year-old retiree with a third of his portfolio in precious metals. He'd like also to invest in Bitcoin, but I don't have the time or the patience to wade through all the alternatives. Do you have any suggestions, such as a Bitcoin ETF or other simple investment vehicle that I can utilize to invest in the crypto sector? Now, I have to say, these questions did come from like 10 days ago. So I don't know if this person would feel like they should be investing in Bitcoin today after the crypto wipeout sort of that happened in the last week. But
yeah. One of many cyclical crypto wipeouts. So the question is the recent wipeout, when it collapsed from over 60,000 to about 30,000, say, is that the beginning of a new trend or just another cyclical buying opportunity? Well, I don't know, but first I gotta say, you don't invest in Bitcoin. You're speculating in Bitcoin. Your investment is an allocation of capital that will create more capital. It's like planting a seed. That's not what happens when you buy Bitcoin. You're betting that its price will go up. I mean, essentially, there's other reasons to own it, but
Right.
so you speculate in it. So get that thought.
Well, and with that thought, you end up naturally allocating a smaller portion of your portfolio to it, understanding that it's like, it could go either way. Right. And, and then if it's big, then it can have a huge outsized impact on your portfolio, but you don't allocate half of it there. And I imagine you'd say the same thing about, gold stocks and things like that too, that these are speculations. Or would you consider those investments? I mean, how would you look at that today?
Well, gold mining companies are theoretically productive enterprises, so they could be investments, but historically, they're just crappy investments. I mean, every there's a reason why Warren Buffett, uh, up until very recently, has never bought a gold stock or a mining stock, frankly. I mean, there's just too many problems with the business, as an investment. I mean, everything from being totally the effect of whatever commodity prices do to having to make your investment upfront with the return not coming for years in the future, regulatory problems from the government, problems from the natives, shakedowns. You can't move the business. It's a horrible business. But right now, cyclically, it's a fantastic place to allocate capital.
Hmm.
I mean, listen, if gold goes back to $1,000 an ounce and stays there, and all other prices stay the same, I'm going to have to reduce my standard of living, quite frankly, because I'm really overweighted in gold and silver and uranium and copper and things of that nature.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Next question. If World War III happened and Doug and Matt survived and came out of their bunkers, and you can choose any known firearms in the world, what would Doug and Matt's preferred primary and secondary firearms be?
You go first.
This is tough. I mean, for me, it's tough. I think you certainly. Well, actually, I should finish the last question. He says, for an apocalyptic wasteland full of mutated, vicious, cannibal humans, I guess is what he says. So that's, you got to know your enemy, I think, to know the weapon.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking close quarters primarily. So you take out the 50 caliber Barrett rifle, sniper rifle, probably, because probably not necessarily with the zombie mutants running around. And we're talking small caliber firearms, I assume fundamentally I can't have mortars or an AT-4 rocket launcher or a howitzer or anything like that. So I guess I would, well, certainly a good 12 gauge shotgun can do a lot of really useful work all the time. Can help you for a lot of reasons. And it's tough because if you can't, my default would be a rifle over a handgun as a secondary weapon to a shotgun. And have the shotgun remain your close quarters weapon. So, I guess in that case, you'd probably have to go with like an AR style 308, probably.
Okay, I buy that. That's excellent reasoning. I think, in my opinion, from soup to nuts. What would I go for a handgun? Uh, listen, I'm kind of old school. I'm a traditionalist. I really like the government model 1911, the Colt. And there are many varieties of them that have been thoroughly worked over so that they're just excellent guns. In the 3-gun contests, the winner almost always has a 45 caliber 1911 variant. So I'd go with that for a handgun, a sidearm, and I think you got to have a sidearm.
Yeah, probably.
Really, I mean, because it's convenient, it's with you all the time, and there's nothing like a 45 for stopping power. Although you can say maybe a 40 caliber S&W gives you the best of both worlds. I don't know. So now we're talking about nitpicking. But the most common caliber, if ammunition is a question, because you got to have ammunition, and there's more 9mm ammunition floating around than anything else from a practical point of view, maybe that's better. So make your choice. I totally agree with you. A shotgun is the way to fly. Should it be a pump or should it be a semi-auto?
Semi-auto.
Yeah, I kind of like the semi-auto myself too. And a rifle, maybe they'll give us a third gun. So am I going to go for an AK spin-off, or for that matter, an SKS? Because these things are indestructible. They're made like Russian trucks, primitive, but they really work well. Or do I want to go with an AR, which I really prefer? I don't know. Or maybe I want to go. You mentioned a 308. Maybe you want to do that. And if I chose a 308, the 308 that I think I would choose would be an FAL, the Fabrique Nationale Fusil Automatique Légère. That's what it is. It's the Cadillac, I think. Although you could get an AR-10, which is the 308, and it's like I think that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you on the sidearm. You want to have a sidearm, but only given two. I mean, the basics are you want a rifle, you want a shotgun, you want a handgun. But then naturally limiting us to two kind of puts you in a bind, I thought. But I guess that's the point.
Well, what are you going to do if you have only one weapon that you have to choose?
Well, I definitely take a sidearm, and it would be 45 caliber, but I would not do a 1911. I'd do something more like a Glock or a Springfield XD, something that can hold more rounds.
Yeah, that's right. And it's lighter in weight. That's a plus too. And those Glocks are indestructible, basically.
Yeah, they really are. Yep.
Simple. Yeah, true.
Okay, next question. I live in Manitoba, Canada, and they recently announced that they will issue vaccine cards, and the government said they will force you to provide these at government personal care homes and other government institutions that I couldn't care less about. But they have been mentioning that to exit and to enter the provincial border, not even the US-Canada border, but the provincial border, they will give vaccinated a pass on their stupid quarantine. So the question is, should I want to buy a farm on the countryside and hope that the idiocy falls apart, or should I make a move to somewhere else? The world is really running out of options, but I think self-sufficiency is key to our future, as the World Economic Forum and the UN are pushing for dependency on the state. The only survival, in my view, is being independent from the system completely. Thoughts from both you and Doug on this? I live in the countryside now, but it's still a retirement community area, and many here don't care about health orders, but most have gotten vaccinated.
Well, that's an very interesting question, because, is it possible we're going to go into a Mad Max kind of world? Yeah, I think it's entirely possible. I mean, no predictions here, but maybe Manitoba is not the best area. I don't know where in Manitoba, but it can get pretty cold up there on the northern plains.
Short growing season.
Yeah, exactly. And you're gonna have to heat your digs for 6 months of the year, more or less. So maybe the location isn't ideal. I mean, was that in the back of my mind when I recently moved from Aspen in the mountains to the river shore in the east, where worst case I can go out and catch a fish or root up an oyster or a crab, worst case. And this place is lousy with rabbits and deer and stuff like that. Not more than Aspen. Well, of course, I could go out in my backyard and shoot an elk in Aspen too. Anyway, I don't know, what's the answer?
Yeah, I mean, the big question is it better to get remote in the countryside in Manitoba, or should he look at, in your mind, opportunities outside of Canada? Just simply, I think it's within the context of the fact that the Manitoba government has been pretty extreme with its, its push in vaccines and vaccine passports.
Well, and Canada itself is getting more extreme than the US, even though we have actual Bolsheviks in Washington. But here, I just read something last night, and I have to verify this to be absolutely sure. But apparently, the Italians have gone completely crazy when it comes to these vaccines. Everybody in Italy, what I read, uh, and of course, I don't believe anything the first time I read it, I need confirmation. Everybody in Italy is going to have to be vaccinated. End of story. They'll make you do it. Have you heard this yet?
I haven't, but I'll ask a friend. I'll find out.
I mean, I just hope that this is a stupid and unreliable internet meme, but it seemed unreliable, although I was reading it just before I went to bed, so perhaps I wasn't even absorbing the data clearly. I mean, that's over. It was over the top. I mean, if you're in Italy, a citizen, resident, or a tourist, you're vaccinated, or they will vaccinate you. That's what it seemed to say.
So if you're an Italian and if you can confirm or deny this for us, please do so in the comments, and I'll reach out and ask an Italian friend of mine, see if he has more information. But I do think getting away, being as I think his main point about not being dependent upon or being dependent on as few systems as possible makes a ton of sense. So, if that in the countryside, better than being in a major city, certainly. But I think you just have to look at what options are actually available to you personally. Like what really can you do, and then start doing it, because I just don't know how much time people are going to have to, if they want to stay out of the system, if they want to, disconnect from the system. I feel like it's going to get harder and harder over time, not easier.
What if somebody has really no assets? They're renting their apartment. They have debt, credit card debt, automobile debt, student debt. If you're younger, most people do, it seems, many. What do you do then? I mean, you are pretty well boxed in. You don't have any flexibility.
Well, if you don't have any dependents like children or something, or then I just I think I just walk away. I mean, I just go somewhere else. I mean, I don't.
Yeah, and I think you might be able to justify that pretty easily morally. I mean, and correctly. I mean, student debt. I mean, who's that debt to? You could say, well, I was scammed. I was stupid. But I was scammed. So walk away from the student debt, credit card debt. The banks are basically arms of the government. Doesn't matter if you walk away; they're not going to go bankrupt. The Fed will just print up more money. Okay, do that. Yeah, maybe you have to wipe the slate clean. Say, hey, I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, and I mean, not to say you couldn't still, like, real obligations, you feel like you still need to pay, like you could still earn a living somewhere else and pay them. But I think that one of the things I see among a lot of young people is they've actually have themselves in this weird trap where they're paying for their past, for their education mostly, and then they're paying for their future through oftentimes it's a little bit of credit card debt, but it's like usually a lot of car debt, like a lot of like loans in their car. And it's like, you wonder why you don't have any money for living today. It's because you're paying for the past when you didn't, because you didn't pay for it along the way. And now you're paying so basically you're pulling all your future forward constantly, and you're wondering why it's not working. Well, debt is the reason it's not working. Like that, you just gotta have to cut that cycle off. And it could mean, go, go. You hate to say for people who live in their parents' basement, but I mean, honestly, versus paying some expensive rent somewhere, it's a better idea if you're in debt. Like, it's a stupid idea to continue this lifestyle stuff, and you're never free. You're a total slave.
On top of the fact that you talked about the past and the future, and in the present, you're paying $5 for a cup of coffee down at Starbucks. That's after-tax money. It adds up.
Right. Yeah. So that's like cup of coffee is at least like $7.25 to you. It's not $5. It's a lot. Yeah. So, all right. Next question. Do you have any thoughts on the connection between the World Economic Forum's quote, "You won't own anything and you'll be happy," with the fact that BlackRock and other big private equity firms are buying up real estate at above market prices across the US?
Buying anything at above market prices usually doesn't work out very well in the long run. And apropos of what we were talking about earlier, with my experience with owning stuff and renting it is, I don't like dealing with the public. I don't like being a landlord because
Yep.
uh,
Fixing toilets is
it's
not my
just
game.
stressful. It's a pain. You don't know who you're dealing with when you're dealing with the public, which is what BlackRock. It's not renting to an old and trusted friend that you know. No, I mean, I think that BlackRock has gotten too big for their britches, and they may just blow themselves up. And it could happen in a number of different ways.
It could, but they were the, what do you call it? Uh, they decided how the bailout money would be spent by the feds during the pandemic stuff. So that, like, they chose how to, they were the, I don't know, it's not a custodian, but they were the people that were able to direct where the monies went, the bailout monies. And so I think, they're in a weird position. They are a pseudo government agency in their connections and being so tight. And I think it could be involved because remember, my kind of base hypothesis around all the real estate stuff is that the government will own it. The government will own it. So if BlackRock buys it and they're putting it all in a special fund, and that fund, becomes insolvent for whatever reason, I think it'll be a good bank, bad bank situation where the Fed or the feds will buy it from BlackRock. They'll buy all this housing because they don't want to cause disruptions among the renters or whatever else. But like, I just feel like that's going to end up being transferred to the government. And I don't think that hard to imagine BlackRock will suffer, since even during during the craziest down market period of this pandemic stuff, back in March, uh, the Fed started buying BlackRock's corporate, subprime debt ETF. Like, the Fed bought their ETF, you know, it's like, it's crazy. So I don't know. I feel like they're there to bail them out.
I think it'd be interesting to do an investigation of BlackRock. How did they get as big as they have gotten, as fast as they've gotten? And just in the news, you hear much more about BlackRock than you do about Goldman Sachs, the vampire squid. They've been pushed into the background by BlackRock. So I'd like to look into this a little bit more just for my own information to see what is going on. How did this happen?
Yeah. Great question. If anyone has seen any research on this, please put it in the comments so we help us understand. Let's see. Just a few more questions here, as we're a little over time. Let's see. Sorry, I don't want to ask questions that are essentially repeating questions. Bear with me for a moment. Is it possible that our future is actually awesome, and that we skip most of the doom and gloom?
Yes, it is. It is possible. Skip
How?
some of the doom and gloom anyway. I
How?
mean, who was it that said this? I think it was Haldane who said, the future is not only going to be better than you imagine, it's going to be better than you can imagine. And that's kind of echoed by Ray Kurzweil, who has for years been promoting the idea of the singularity, which I incidentally believe in. So maybe it just depends on where you are. It could be like perhaps the United States is going to, science fiction is such a good predictor of the future, so much better than any think tank. So maybe technology is going to continue advancing rapidly in certain centers where there's capital and smart people and things still work. And most of the country turns into like Hunger Games territory. Anything's possible.
Yeah, I mean, technology is the way certainly is a problem in many ways, but it's historically been the answer to human challenges. And, there's a lot of new technology. And I think that, maybe in the long game, 100 years from now, folks like us who are clinging to the ideas of personal privacy, for instance, will be looked at as Luddites that just missed, we just missed the point of what was possible with technology.
That's true. And certainly what the Chinese are doing, it's funny. It was perhaps 6 months ago, everybody was talking about the Chinese social credit system, where unless you had a good rating, you can't get on a plane or even a fast train, you can't buy a nice house. And that still exists in China, and apparently it's working pretty smoothly, and the average Chinese likes it. And I'm told, I don't know any of them personally, but there are that young people like to compare their
scores,
their credit scores.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's going along with what's actually happening in China. So yeah, it could be that we're actual dinosaurs. And if that's the case, I'm afraid that I would probably be one of those slow old brontosauruses, not one of those smart little velociraptor dinosaurs too. So
Right.
probably the worst kind of dinosaur. Possible. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, there are, technologically speaking, so many incredibly fascinating things to offer huge potential for humanity. And I think that if it weren't for what seemed like a combination of evil and incompetent leaders that seem to be running things in the world, I would definitely I think my bias would be to the positive. It's just that the incompetent humans that seem to be at the top of the hierarchy and seem to hate us that concern me.
Well, and actually worse than that, because we've always had criminals. I mean, politics draws criminals, and the scum always does rise to the top, always has actually, but it's worse now than ever, because since democracy has become the kind of the secular religion of everybody, I mean, democracy can do no wrong, the average guy is voting for these criminals and they like it. So, and of course it works both ways, and the government supports these people and turns them into serfs. So it's become kind of a negative feedback loop where it seems to be getting worse. And from a historical point of view, even while technology has been advancing and the average guy saves money and builds capital, and yeah, things have gotten better in so many ways over the last 100 years, but personal freedom has been in a definite decline for a long time here in the United States, for well over 100 years.
Right. It isn't new. It isn't something that showed up last year. It's been
No.
this trend has been there my whole life, for sure.
And it's accelerating into a crescendo now. So all we need now is for the Cold War going on with COVID and now climate change to turn into a hot war in those ways where people go wild, maybe added with a real hot war with China, which, war is always the health of the state. So prognosis is not good. God, I hate to be so gloomy. It's just that I want somebody to point out how I'm wrong. I'd like to know, somebody to tell me how I'm wrong. I mean, maybe, I've said for years, maybe friendly aliens will land on the roof of the White House and present us with a magic technology where nobody has to work, food appears, we'd be in heaven.
Hopium.
That could happen. That would be a technological breakthrough, wouldn't it?
It would, but this is as we talked about last time, it's hopium. This is the idea that our human belief that somebody is going to come along and save us somehow with some magic tool or just at the last second, to save us, just like any good Steven Spielberg film.
Yeah, exactly. The good guys win in the end.
Yeah, I think, but I think though, in what way you were describing the problem within that is the answer, is the solution. And that is that the negative feedback loop that's created between the leadership and their holding up of democracy, and then they're providing benefits and creating dependencies with the population, and that that negative cycle is just spinning it more and more out of control. If you could step aside from it and just not participate in that cycle, it'll eventually wind itself down. Like it could be in a terrible manner. It could be in an awful, manner. But I think if you can just step out of that cycle altogether somehow, if you can disconnect from it, then I think, once that works itself out, that the technology is still there theoretically, and there's lots of opportunities and lots of hope for the future.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a theory.
Hey, look at the bright side. I always try to look at the bright side. I have a hard time seeing it sometimes, but I'm always looking for the bright side. Possibility.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll leave it at that for today, and we'll be back next week. Thanks, Doug. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Matt.